Good morning. We come in our daily Bible reading to Revelation chapter 14, and what we find in this chapter is a bit of a callback to chapter 7. You run into the 144,000 who had been sealed. And if we remember talking about the 144,000, what was the context of that? Well, the angels were about to announce some sort of judgment and destruction upon the land, and they were to hold on until they had sealed the 144,000 of God. As we think about that, we need to recall who they are. That first of all, these were those on the earth, that they were going to be protected from any of the outpouring of wrath of God. But that also, that these are God's chosen, that these are God's children. And there was a great multitude in heaven. There's 144,000 on earth. We're going to run into them again. God knows who his people are. Now, sometimes there's a temptation to take some parts of Revelation hyper literally. And the problem is when you try to take 144,000 literally, there's a lot of issues. Number one, it'd have to be all Jews, because that's what chapter 7 says. And we run into some more complications here in chapter 14 if you try to take it literally. So the best idea is to remember that the 144,000 is the collective of God's people. You have 12 disciples of Jesus, 12 tribes of Israel. You multiply those together, you get 144. And then 10 times 10 times 10, the complete number, to the fullest, we might say. It's 1,000 times 144. You have your 144,000. It's the complete selection of God's people. So as we read Revelation chapter 14, let's remember that God knows who his people are, and that in spite of the beast's power, in spite of the second beast's false signs and wonders, we need to stick with God forever. He will provide lasting protection. Revelation chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. They were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. And I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and springs of water." And another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. He will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, whoever receives the mark of its name." Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." So we remember in Revelation chapter 13 that there was this marking. In the case of marking in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 16, is that they were to be marked on the right hand or the forehead so that they can buy and sell. That is, if you want to participate in this world, you have to commit to a side. You can't be on God's side. You have to commit to the beast. You have to commit to the devil. And as you look at these 144,000, they're sealed a different way in verse 1. The 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. They were protected from the wrath. They were sealed, not by the beast, not by Satan, but by the Almighty God. And so, first question we have to ask ourselves in application is, whose side am I truly on? Not whose side do I want to be on, not whose side is going to win. We know the answer to that is God is going to win. We should want to be with the victors. We should want to be with our Creator. The question is, what side are my actions on? If I'm forced to choose, or in my day-to-day life when I do choose, do I choose to be on God's side, or do I choose to be on the devil's? So you think about this in verse 5, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. There's a very distinct difference in the 144,000 and those who have the mark of the beast. And that clearly is righteousness, a commitment to God. And we see this again. This is a callback of chapter 13. Now here it is in chapter 14 and verse 12. Here's a call for the endurance of the saints. Who are they? How do we know if we're on that side? Those who keep the commandments of God in their faith in Jesus. We want to make sure that we are sealed by God. We are protected by our Creator. And so to do that, we need to keep our faith in Jesus and keep the commandments of our God. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 12 is very clear that even though the beasts have power in chapter 13, we need to have endurance. We need to keep the commandments. We need to keep the faith. And so we talk about the angels here in verse 6. And so with an eternal gospel in verse 6, one angel comes proclaiming to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. He's saying, fear God and give him glory. Judgment has come. Worship him. Now, if you recall in Revelation chapter 13, in verse 7, the first beast was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it, of those, of course, whose name are not in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. And so here, the angel is calling out with this eternal gospel. Please make an eternal calculation. That word is so crucial here in verse 6 and 7. When you think about this eternal gospel in verse 6, to fear God in verse 7, to give him glory, it's remembering that, yes, there can be some ease. Yes, there can be some advantages, quote unquote, to giving in to sin, to worshiping the devil here and now. But we need to live for something greater, better, something that is fixed and assured of. That is, judgment day is coming. Revelation is clear about a few things, even in spite of all the signs. And one of those things is there's going to be a war. God's going to win. There's going to be a judgment on you and I. And the question will be, where are we lining up? Which mark do we take? What do our actions teach? So this gospel is going out. Fear God. Give him glory. The second one in verse 8, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Now this is a little odd because Babylon as an empire has fallen hundreds, if not thousands of years before this. And so really, as you think about this in Revelation times of 95 AD and Babylon having fallen, let's say 500 or 600 BC, to be kind, you look at a period of 500 or 600, 700 years and you say, why is John referencing Babylon? Well, if Rome is as strong as chapter 13 illustrates, if Rome is as strong as history designates that it was, what do you think would happen to a group of Christians walking around with a document that says, we're part of a kingdom that's going to last, a kingdom that's going to defeat yours? And by the way, Rome is fallen. Do you think Rome would take that very well? Not in the slightest. Babylon the Great would be a reference for a kingdom of this world that put its faith in themselves. It's put its faith in me, myself, and I. And God used Babylon. God also used Assyria. In fact, in Isaiah chapter 10, he called Assyria the rod of my anger. God uses these kingdoms, but often they are guilty. You see this in Isaiah chapter 10. You're going to see this with Babylon, that they're going to look at themselves and say, we are great. We are special. Not God is great. Not God is special. And so that's going to be an important distinction. So when we read Babylon is fallen, we think about Rome and why. She made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. The opposite of the 144,000, the opposite of God's people, these people who give in to Rome, participate in the sexual immorality of Rome, they're going to fall with Rome as well. And so we see in verse 9, if anyone worships the beast in its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath. Now, this is frightening stuff. And when you take 13 and 14, very important choice. I can take the mark of the beast, and what do I get for that? Well, I can buy and sell. I can trade. I can be filled. I can have an ease of life. But I'm also going to get what? In verse 10, the outpouring of God's wrath. And what's the problem with the outpouring of God's wrath? Well, first of all, God is stronger than Rome, no matter what it looks like, no matter what it feels like. But also, you see this in verse 11, the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, whoever receives the mark of its name. God's judgment is eternal. Rome's judgment is temporal. Very important distinction throughout the book of Revelation. Important distinction for our lives. This world can be tough. It can be hard. It can be difficult to do the right thing. We need to know this is temporal. This is the 3.5 years, not the 7 years. This is not the 42 months. This would in fact be the 84 months, the 7 years. And so as we think about worshiping God, we need to remember the eternal consequences. And here we are in verse 14. Then I looked and behold a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it in the great winepress of the wrath of God. The winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. So we see a couple things. God has protected his 144,000. The angels have announced their judgment to fear God or else. And here is the or else. In verse 14, notice where this originates. I looked and behold a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And what's going to happen? There's going to be this terrible depiction of judgment. This isn't just judgment of who's righteous and who's unrighteous. This is a judgment on the wicked. This is a judgment on the beast, the second beast, on the devil. Those who are guilty, when judgment day comes, they will be pressed by the wrath of God. I think verse 19 is very clear. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it in the great winepress of the wrath of God. When you picture what a winepress is, you think about the sickle's harvesting of these grapes stored up for wrath and the wrath of God being pressed upon the people. It is a brutal image of what it's like to be standing in the way of our God. Let's make the calculation today. I will serve him faithfully, no matter how inconvenient it be, no matter how tempting it might be to give in, to take some sort of temporary advantage over the permanent eternal one. It's so tough to stay committed forever. And that's why in chapter 13 and in chapter 14, we see a call for endurance. It's going to be tough, but it's not as tough when we look at the judgment day. When you think about the mark of the beast gets me to buy and sell, gets me ease, gets me an enjoyable 50, 60, 70, 80 years at best. What about the mark of God? Protection. Protection from what? Well, protection, I don't have to worry about what that beast does. I don't have to worry about what the false prophet does. I don't have to worry about the devil. And most importantly, I don't have to worry about the wrath of God. God is going to judge the world. That is certain. That is fixed. And when I take the mark of God, when I dedicate myself to his righteousness and his will and his way, I know that my Redeemer lives, and I don't have to worry anymore about salvation because God has granted it to me. And the judgment is for those who deny him. Choose God today. And also, let's be evangelistic. Let's remember that there are souls at stake. Some who know about God and are rejecting him, but some who don't. Let's reach out. Let's talk about the good news of God, the good news of Jesus, the Lamb who was slain and who wears the crown. Let's put our faith in God and have endurance today. I hope you join us tomorrow. This is today Revelation chapter 15 and learn more about our conquering Lord in this battle of judgment that is to come.